For as long as we've been around, we've looked up at the sky, or deep inside ourselves, and asked this one huge question. What is all this? What's the real nature of reality? Today, we're going to dive into the work of philosopher Miri al-Bahari to check out two completely different ways people have tried to answer that very question.
So, yeah, what is fundamental reality? For centuries, this single question has pushed humanity's greatest minds down two totally different paths. One path leads outward, into the cosmos, into the atoms, and the other, well, that one leads inward, into the mystery of consciousness itself.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by laying out these two paths. Then we'll get into the big arguments the outward-looking folks have against the inward-looking ones. After that, we'll see how the inward path fights back, and we'll wrap up by asking if maybe, just maybe, these two paths could actually work together.
Okay, picture two explorers. They both want to map the world, to find its ultimate source. But one decides to sail across every ocean, and the other decides to just start digging, straight down. Well, those are our two main characters today, the metaphysician and the mystic.
So on one hand, you have the metaphysician. They look outward. Their tools are logic, reason, hard scientific data. They're trying to find objective truths about a world they see as separate from them. But the mystic, they look inward. Their main tool is meditation, and their goal is to get direct access to the source of experience itself, because they believe the one who's looking and the thing they're looking for are actually one and the same.
So what exactly does the mystic find on this inner journey? Let's take a look at a few of their, let's call them, field reports. This one, from the ancient Indian Upanishads, talks about a pure, unitary consciousness, not a world of many different things, but one single fundamental thing. And they call it the self.
And listen, this isn't just some Eastern idea. Fast forward a few centuries to Germany, and you have the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart saying something that sounds shockingly similar. My eye and God's eye are one eye. The whole separation between the person looking and the thing being looked at, it just completely dissolves.
And we see it again in the Sufi tradition with Ibn Arabi. The key phrase here, freed from your dualism. It seems like across all these different cultures and time periods, the mystics who journey inward come back with the same basic report. Fundamental reality is a non-dual, unified consciousness. But our metaphysician, listening to all this, they are not convinced.
So from the metaphysician's outward-looking point of view, these mystical claims just sound, well, subjective and totally unprovable. So they fire back with four major challenges to the mystic's whole project. And you know what? They're really powerful arguments.
Let's break down the skeptic's case here. It really boils down to these four big points. Their method is circular, science just has a better explanation, their reports contradict each other, and frankly, the data itself is just plain unreliable.
Okay, first up, the circularity charge. The skeptic says, look, if your only tool is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, right? So if your only method is to look at your own consciousness through meditation, is it really a surprise that you conclude consciousness is fundamental? The method basically guarantees the result.
Second is the argument from naturalism. You can think of it as Occam's razor. Science has an incredible track record of explaining things in physical terms. So isn't it just way simpler, way more likely, to assume these mystical experiences are just interesting, maybe unusual brain states, instead of some genuine hotline to cosmic consciousness?
The third challenge gets into the data itself. The mystics all use different words. One calls it God, another calls it Brahman, another calls it Allah. The skeptic says, see, this proves they aren't all experiencing the same thing. They're just having experiences that are shaped by their own culture and their own beliefs.
And that leads right into the final and maybe biggest charge, unreliability. How can you possibly build a model of reality based on purely subjective internal feelings? This isn't objective data that anyone can verify. It's personal, it's private, and it's full of all kinds of biases and wishful thinking. You just can't build a science on that.
So that is a really tough case against the mystic. Honestly, it sounds like it could shut the whole conversation down right there. But according to al-Bahari's analysis, every single one of these charges has a pretty compelling counter-argument. So let's hear the case for the defense.
Remember that circularity charge? Well, the defense's response is basically, hold on a minute, you're doing the exact same thing. The metaphysician's methods, logic, analyzing scientific data, they all start with the assumption that reality is something out there that can be understood with the thinking mind. So both sides are using a method that assumes its own way is the right way. It's kind of a philosophical stalemate.
Okay, to get this next point, we have to talk about something called the hard problem of consciousness. And it's actually pretty simple. Science is amazing at explaining how the brain works. Neurons firing, chemicals, all that. But it has absolutely no explanation for why it feels like something to be you. Why do we have this rich inner world of subjective experience, like the actual taste of chocolate or the redness of a sunset? And this is exactly why the naturalist argument isn't a silver bullet anymore. Because science is so profoundly stuck on the hard problem, it just doesn't get to have the final say on consciousness. The fact that materialism can't account for our inner experience, well, it opens the door to actually taking other possibilities, like the mystic's data, a lot more seriously.
So what about all those different names? God, Brahman, the self? The defense argues that this is a difference in vocabulary, not in the actual experience. The core insight that mystics report, no matter where they are, is this feeling of the boundary between me and the world just dissolving. Different cultures just grab the words they have on hand to try and point at that same incredible experience of unity.
Here's a really cool analogy from the source material to help get your head around this. Think of your own personal awareness as the space inside a jar. Now, from inside that jar, the space seems to have a specific shape, right? The shape of the jar. But we all know that the space itself is boundless. It's not actually defined by the jar. The mystical insight is like realizing you're not the shape inside the jar, you're the boundless space itself.
And to get a feel for what that boundless awareness might be like, let's just do a quick thought experiment. Imagine a cognosensory deprivation tank. First, we take away all your senses. No sight, no sound, no touch. Then, we take away all your thoughts, memories, and mental images. So what's left? What could possibly be there? Well, the mystics' hypothesis is that what's left isn't just nothing. It's a field of pure, unstructured awareness itself. And this helps us answer that final charge of unreliability. So what if some modern research into meditation shows a bunch of different, messy results? Does that prove the mystic wrong? Well, not necessarily. Think about it like climbers on a mountain. If you interview them all at different altitudes, you're going to get a lot of different reports about the climb. But that doesn't prove there isn't a single summit at the top. It just proves that everyone's at a different stage of the journey.
So, where does this whole philosophical showdown leave us? Maybe it's not about one side winning and the other losing. Maybe what we're actually looking at is a brand new frontier, where the mystic's inward path could give us a whole new kind of data for understanding reality.
I think this is the crucial point. What if we reframe meditation? What if we stop seeing it just as a spiritual practice and start seeing it as a rigorous instrument for exploring the mind? I mean, it is a systematic training of attention. It's designed to reduce the very personal biases that skeptics are worried about, and its whole purpose is to wear down that constant me lens that filters everything, potentially giving us a much clearer, more direct view of consciousness itself.
And this leaves us with a final and pretty fascinating question to think about. The metaphysician science has given us this incredible map of the objective external world. So could the mystic's contemplative practice become the science of our subjective internal reality? A way to finally begin to map the territory of consciousness itself?